Welcome to Help, I'm a Parent, Christian Parenting in the Real World. We're your hosts, Drs. Claudio and Pamela Consuegra, and together we serve as the Directors of Family Ministries for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Today we will be discussing teens moving from dependence on you to one of independence. Researchers have concluded that freedom can be an addiction in our teens. Yes, freedom creates an addictive high. Freedom is said to be an intoxicating agent. So how do we draw the boundaries to freedom? How much is too much and how little is too little?
We're delighted to be joined today by Dr. Eric and Anne Marie Bates, the Family Ministries Directors for the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Dr. Bates, Anne Marie, we're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Before we begin our conversation, though, we want to hear from some parents that told us about their challenges and their concerns in launching their kids.
When is it time to let the eaglets out of the nest? Do you drop them and push them out, or what? You know, how does that work for you guys?
Go ahead.
I think it depends on culture. For
That's
me,
true.
I'm from a different country. I'm from Barbados. So we tend to hold on to the kids. But I've learned from other people in this country and being educated here that there's a time to let go. So I've had to learn that. It was a process, but I did it.
Yeah. I think that's the hardest part, right?
Yeah, especially with our eldest, how she makes her decisions and everything is not quite there. So we still want to parent, but then, she needs to crash and burn on her own so she can learn from that experience.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a tough tension, though, with all this, too, though, because you want them to grow and become independent. That's kind of the goal, that they become everything that God created them to be, right? Sure. But at the same time, they're not ready. We're not ready to see them go. And so, it's hard to let them make their own mistakes even. If we save them all the time, then they never learn to make the decision themselves. So it's tough, right?
Yeah.
I think as a parent, we tend to have a checklist of what before you can leave, you have to have a bachelor degree, or you have to have a car, or you have to have a job, or you have to be mature enough. But how do we measure all that? Because sometimes they can have all those aspects all together, but at the same time we feel that they're not ready, maybe because we don't want them to go, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we see some things that we feel like they're still not ready in a mature way to deal with the real world without us.
Yeah.
So where we draw the line, they say, okay, they're ready to go, right?
Yeah, but it's tough.
It's interesting. One of the parents made a comment that there are cultural differences.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that has been your experience as well.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, I was thinking that our contemporary Western culture is really the first culture to take kids when they reach a certain age and uproot them from family, uproot them from their community, and send them off to survive on their own. Historically, the way cultures have done it is when a young person is an adult and takes their place in society, there's still a close connection with the family, there's still a close connection with extended family and community. And so there's a continuing mentoring and discipling that takes place even into the adult years.
Yeah. Now you mentioned in this culture, but even more so in the Adventist subculture, where we send our kids out to academy because we don't have a school close by, and then we send them on to college because we don't have one close by, or because we don't want them to go to a one close by. So is that what you're referring to, how we launch them early?
Yeah, and in the past, when we've done that, the distant past, 80 years ago, there was still a very close connection between the adults and the peers.
Sure.
Today, I don't think we have that as much. As campuses grow larger and there are more young people, there's more of a peer culture and less contact with the adults.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Dr. Bates, because how important is it as parents, that we maintain that connection as we talk about, we want you to be independent. How important is it that I'm still connected to them?
Right. Well, I think it's ideal. I mean, it's imperative. And really what we're talking about is not true independence, but an interdependence, where we're changing or transitioning from a child who's dependent upon mom and dad to feed them and to clothe them, but not to raise a child who's now an adult who's completely independent. We want them to be part of a community. So what I see is the role of the parents is shifting from providing for the actual needs, the emotional needs, the physical needs, and transitioning more from that provider to a mentor, to a friend, an advisor who's still walking alongside of them, still directing them, still guiding them.
Right. And I think some of us as parents anyways have that difficulty of giving them the independence, maybe because we've noticed that they're not mature enough, or maybe we're just not aware that they are able or ready to take the next step. What I think concerns me the most is when I hear parents who say, I can't wait for them to leave home. And I don't know if you have heard parents say that. What would you say to parents that would say to you, I can't wait to get rid of these kids?
Well, I think in that launching, it's a process that begins, you begin thinking about it 5 years ahead of time at least. And a lot of times our desire for our kids to go, our desire for the kids to launch sooner than later is because of the relationship status as it is.
Yes.
Very true.
And so if our focus is, even now, even in the earlier years, before they hit the 13-year-old mark, we're already thinking about launching, and we're focusing on that relational bond between. I think that will help a lot with that idea of hurry up and come time to launch. And so what I'm thinking is during that time before launch is I want to be in relationship with my kids.
Yes.
Well, how do I do that? If that maintaining that relationship is so important in terms of launching, how do I make sure that I nurture and maintain that relationship with my children? Give us some practical ways.
Well, you were about to say
No,
something.
go ahead.
Quality and quantity of time.
Okay.
Making yourself available, coming and stopping at their bedroom door when they're shut off to the world, listening to their music, their iPod, or on the computer, and hang out with them. And
Not talking so much, but listening more.
absolutely. So, our default, I think our default as parents is to use any time we have when we're with our child, our teen, is to use it as a time to instruct, to correct, to lecture. But instead of using that time as a time to listen, find out what their passions are, find out what their fears are, what drives them, what they love. And that's just one example of connecting with them. Also, just modeling Christ yourself to your kids. A lot of times parents come across to their teens as, I've arrived spiritually, I've got it all together.
And so should you.
Yeah.
Right.
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 Exactly. But, kids have hypocrite radar. They know that we struggle,
Very true.
despite how we hide it.
Yeah.
So if we're upfront with our children and say, I'm a saint, I'm a sinner, I'm a sufferer. So instead of turning it into a lecture experience, connect with them, identify with them, and say, I have similar struggles that you do, and this is what God has done for me.
Yeah.
So I see for the spiritual aspect of it, our role is to relate Jesus, not be preachy, but just show the gospel, how the gospel has impacted my life and how it can impact theirs.
And when you talk about that as parents even, that we fail and we need to help our children understand that. In the video clip, one of the moms talked about, as we go through this process, we often have to watch our children, and she used the term crash and burn.
Right.
How important is it for a parent to actually allow a child to sometimes experience that failure?
It's very important.
Talk about that.
And I know my biggest struggle as a mom in being able to do that is fear. And when we can face that as parents and deal with our own fear, it will have a huge impact on how we're able to relate to our kids and let them fail in the little things. Now, what we tend to do is overmanage in the little things, and then the kids balk. And they want their independence.
Yes.
And so they break away, and then they make the big mistakes. But if we can help them make their mistakes in the more controlled environment, smaller issues, and talk them through the process, help them to learn from the mistake and say, you know, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to fail, because failure is just a learning opportunity. And help them to ask them questions. You know, what did you learn from this? What do you think you could do differently next time? How did you feel about this incident?
So you're suggesting, instead of fixing what they have done, the mistake, the error, rather to help them learn as a result of whatever they've done.
Yeah.
Because it sounds to me like some parents will rush in and say, oh, you did this wrong, let me do
Right,
it myself
right,
then.
right.
Yes.
Well, let's be very specific then, because this series we're talking to parents who have children on the 13 end, but also up until the 18 or 19. So be very specific. What are those little things, maybe decisions or towards independence, that I can start with at 13 years old? Give me an example of what independence looks like for a 13, 14-year-old.
How about grades?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What's that?
So it's tempting. We had one son he still is our son, he's just an adult now. One of our sons is very gifted medically and very intelligent and talented, and knew he wanted to be a doctor. And so it was a temptation to see all the pitfalls for how he might not be able to get into medical school and try to manage and maneuver. But he had to make some mistakes. One year he made a C in chemistry. And we had to back off and say, you know, these are choices. And so there are conversations that you have with them before they make the mistakes to help them see the pitfalls themselves. And you have an influence in their lives. You offer them your perspective. You set the example with your practice, you know, self-discipline and so forth. And then you have to just back off and pray for them and let them make the choices. And when they do come back with a C in chemistry, then instead of pounding them and saying, I told you so, this is going to ruin your life, you know, like we're tempted to do, we have to say, again, what did you learn from this? And how can we recover from this? And also, I think it's imperative that we keep pointing them to God and His redemptive power. How even when we make mistakes, God has a plan B, and He can accomplish His will in their lives, even when they're experiencing a failure.
And there will be many times as our children move from a state of dependence on us to independence, there will certainly be many times that they will fail. And maybe parents need to understand, we want to help them understand this is normal. Failure is a normal part. Do you want to add anything
I'll
to
tell you what we need
that?
to do, though, is we need to take a little break
Okay.
first, and then we will continue this conversation about failure and how we can help our children use that failure toward more success. So come back after the break, and we will continue our conversation with Dr. and Mrs. Bates about that time when we launch our kids toward independence. So join us as we come back.
You can probably already tell that we will not be able to cover every area, every concern, or every question you may have in the short time that we have together. Parenting will continue to produce new challenges and new questions every day. As our children grow and change, so will the parenting challenges that we will face.
Therefore, our goal is to continue this conversation with up-to-date resources and practical parenting tips online via our website, helpimaparent.org. There you may keep updated on our newly released parenting resources, supplemental products, and find additional material for free download. You're also invited to subscribe to an electronic newsletter, read a blog just for parents, and much more.
In addition to that website, we have a Facebook page where we post daily words of encouragement and resources. So look us up, Help, I'm a Parent. And remember to share that Facebook post with the friends in your own social network.
It is our desire that this resource will assist you in your God-given role as a parent by using principles that are firmly grounded in the Word of God. Now let's get back to our conversation with today's guests.
Welcome back as we talk to Dr. Eric and Anne Marie Bates about launching our children from a state of dependence on us to independence. Dr. Bates, right before the break, we were talking about the extreme difference we have with a 13-year-old versus the 18 or 19-year-old, and this whole topic of moving from dependence to independence. Share your thoughts with the child that's maybe 13 and 14 years old as it relates to this.
Well, the wonderful thing about mistakes is when our kids make mistakes, it just identifies the areas that they need further instruction. And so we expect our kids to make mistakes, and when they're younger, the mistakes are easier to deal with as a rule. And so we're looking forward to those mistakes, and as they grow, we're continuing the teaching process. So you don't go from age 13 to the age of 16 where they're asking for the car keys and saying, here you go, without having a pattern of the children expressing or demonstrating responsibility, that they're able to handle that. And they're able to handle it because of the mistakes that they made earlier on.
So I'm hearing you say that's important, that responsibility or this independence does not come automatically at these certain age points, but rather it's earned.
That's right.
That's what you're saying, correct?
And it doesn't come all at once either.
Right.
Right.
And in fact, you mentioned one of those areas that probably most parents have to go through, and it's one of the scariest one, and it's when the kids learn to drive, and you have to give them those car keys. I would assume that we don't just give them the keys and say, have a good life. What kinds of guidelines should we provide our children so that they don't misuse their newfound freedom?
Right. We just went through this recently with our third child. And so it starts with education, and we don't release them with the car keys until they've demonstrated ability, they've demonstrated maturity. So we start with instruction. You start with driver's ed. I mean, you start with having we had a professional come. It was less stressful that way than to have mom and dad do it.
This time. We did it the first 2 times.
And decided
You
we needed a
learned, right? You learned.
And then you set boundaries. You set limits. Once they do pass the driver's test, they get the permit, they pass the driver's test, then you have your own boundaries to make sure that they continue to demonstrate the responsibility.
And it's incremental. It's not something that happens instantly. You know, she started driving no highways, just back and forth to school, and she was driving my van, while at the same time she was learning to drive her car, which is a manual transmission. So she wasn't ready to take the manual yet, so she's driving my vehicle, which is an automatic back and forth.
And we weren't ready for her to have a smaller car. We would like the big van. Right?
One that's more protected, safer, is that the point?
Yes. And then we went from that to allowing her to drive when maybe the roads were wet, after some instruction and some practice with that.
And seeing her do it with us in the car.
So there again, as with all of these things we're talking about, moving from dependence to independence, it's incremental, and it's as their maturity demonstrates, as it's earned with their responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah. And so one of the other guidelines is what happens when they do get to the point where they can drive them on their own. Now they've driven on wet roads, they've driven the different cars. So now they have, in fact, in some states, they will have a permit time, and then the actual license time, and even then, for a year, they have to have a restricted license. But now they have their full license at 16, 17, or whatever, depending on the state. What other guidelines would you provide your children now that they have that full independence?
Well, one of the things we've always told our kids is just because the law says you can do something doesn't mean that our family says you can do something. So, you know, she may be able, he, she, whoever, may be able to get their license at 16, they may be able to be emancipated at 18, but that doesn't mean that they are mature and ready for those things. It just means that now the law allows for it. And sometimes I think we get those two confused.
So is there something that, say for instance, in your family you would say to your kids, I know the law allows for this, but one of the things that we do not allow you to do is
Well, absolutely. Driving on the freeway, for example. She's not ready for the freeway yet
Okay.
because even though she's a fully licensed
Yeah, yeah, yes.
driver, the freeways where we live have very short on-ramps with very heavy traffic, and it's extremely dangerous. I've never lived anywhere that it's this dangerous getting on and off the freeways, or on specifically.
And that's very important. So I'm hearing you say that as long as they're living under our roof, even if they're 16, 17, 18, that there are home rules.
Yes.
That we should expect them to follow.
Yes.
And give us some examples of those home rules.
Well, a curfew would be a
Okay.
home rule.
okay.
Also, a home rule just connected with the car is our kids are taught how to maintain the car. So if you're going to drive a car, then you have to know how to check the oil. You have to know how to change the tire.
Yeah.
When Dad changes brake pads out, I bring the kids over and teach them how to do it. So they, boys and girls, so they know how it needs to be maintained.
I may have
One
to
of
come
our-
visit you because I don't know how to do that.
I'll charge you.
We need to have a lesson.
One of our rules was that they weren't allowed to get their driver's license until they were able to pay for their own auto insurance.
Oh, my, hey.
So that
Gives them
demonstrated a level.
responsibility.
Yes. Yes.
When it costs money, then you're a little bit more careful.
Right. Provide their own gas, gas money.
So now we started with the 13-year-olds, the 16-year-olds. Now we're getting to the other end of adolescence. We're finishing high school or academy, and we're ready, or they're ready for them to leave home and go on to college. What would you say, or what do you say to your children in that preparation for that transition from home to a dorm to an apartment to a college?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm looking for maturity and to see if they're ready for that transition. Some of the things I'm looking for is responsibility. And when I say responsibility, I'm talking about responsibility with their own spiritual life. They've made ownership of that, and they're having regular devotions. Responsible for work. They've had a job. They know what it's like to go to work and be on time and to pay taxes and file that tax return every year. So they've demonstrated that responsibility with work, and also relationships, that they seek healthy relationships. They seek relationships with other adults who are mentors with them and helping to guide. So as your children are shifting from looking to you for guidance, they're expanding that to other godly adults to be their mentors.
And that, I just wanted to interject, that's a big part of determining when they're ready is, are they seeking your counsel? Because at this stage in life, the 18, 19, 20-year-old, you're going to be hard-pressed to be able to tell them, yes, you can do this, but no, you can't do that. You've got to rely far more heavily on your relationship with them. That means that they trust you and they value your wisdom, and they're coming to you and they're asking for guidance. And that's a demonstration of maturity on their part.
So there again, we're coming back to, even as they're getting older and ready to be launched on their own, once again, we're coming back to maintaining that relationship between parent and child.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's something that you said earlier, and I want to come back to that. So now we're sending our kids out there someplace. They don't have us. They don't have grandparents. What do we do to help them when they have left the home base?
One of the things that we have done, well, two things actually. One is when I was forming my friendships with other adults, my circle, I was thinking about, these are the adults that my kids are going to turn to in 5, 10, 15 years when there's an issue that they want to get a perspective that's different from mine. And go
They
to
want a
someone
second
else.
opinion.
Yes.
You're preparing
So
the
I'm
territory.
thinking, yes, I'm thinking, who do I want my kids going to for counsel?
Sure.
And those are my close friends. And that's exactly what happens, is our kids reach a certain point and they start going to my friends, Eric's friends, and saying, I have this question. So they're not going to give the same counsel probably that I would give, but they're going to have the same values.
Yeah, but that's close by. What if they choose to go clear across the country to another school or university?
Well,
Who
that's
would
the
you
other
rely
thing,
on?
is training our kids to seek community with adults.
Okay.
We tend to age segregate because of school. That's the way it's set up.
Yes.
That tends to carry into the social life too. But if we can start when they're 13, acclimating them to being around other adults, having conversations, being comfortable talking to adults, then they're more likely to seek out adult friendships as well when they leave home.
Sure.
And in this day of modern technology, even being far away, they're still going to have a connection with your friends if they value
Sure.
those friendships and those connections.
No, I like that. I like the fact that you're preparing them to feel comfortable with other age groups. So when they move someplace else, they will go to church. They don't feel like strangers. Let's say that they don't have any kids their age. They can still reach out to those who are older. Is that basically
Yes,
what you're
absolutely.
saying? Yeah. And then once they're gone, how do you maintain contact with them?
Well, you reach out, you make the phone calls. I remember when our oldest two went off to college, we would sit by the phone and we would wait for them to call. And it never came. They were so busy. But that doesn't stop us from calling. And when you call, you don't lead with the question, what are you doing? Or you sound accusatory or like a private investigator.
Or why haven't I heard from you in 2 weeks?
But what you're asking is relational questions. How are you? What's going on in your life? Tell me about your struggles. Tell us about the joys in your life right
It's
now.
the good and the bad and the ugly,
bad,
so
the
to
ugly.
speak. Yeah.
And so you're keeping it on that relational tie, that level, and continuing to pursue them as an individual.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the good advice and ideas that you shared with us today. It's been a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to thank Dr. and Mrs. Bate for taking the time to join us today. And we'd also like to remind you to visit our parenting website, helpimaparent.org. There you will find additional resources and materials. And we invite you to join us next time on Help I'm a Parent, when we will continue the conversation about parenting teens in today's world.
And until then, remember that God has called you to be the disciple maker of your child. It is the most important role that you will ever have. And remember, the only thing you can take to heaven with you is your child. It's our prayer that God will bless you as you help your child come to a place of dependence on their Heavenly Father.